How could a man of God betray everything he preached? What could drive a respected pastor, married for nearly 3 decades, to lead a double life steeped in deception? How does a quiet, God-fearing town unravel when its beloved spiritual leader is exposed in a scandal no one saw coming? This is the story of Pastor William Bill Anderson, a man whose reputation as a devoted husband and faithful servant of the Lord masked a shocking secret. For years, he maintained a hidden affair. Not just any affair, but one that defied the rigid expectations of his conservative congregation. His mistress was Alexis Gray, a transgender woman who had moved to Maplewood seeking a fresh start, never realizing she would become entangled in the most explosive scandal the town had ever seen. It wasn't just infidelity that would rock Maplewood to its core. As the truth unraveled, so did an intricate web of financial fraud, hidden retreats, and manipulated church funds. Bill had not only risked his marriage but also the integrity of his entire ministry. And when the shocking revelations came to light, they triggered a whirlwind of betrayal, heartbreak, and small-town fury. This is more than a story of sin and secrecy. It's a tale of love, identity, hypocrisy, and the lengths people will go to in order to keep their darkest desires hidden. In the end, the fallout would leave lives shattered, a church divided, and a town forever changed. But the question remains, was it all truly hidden? Or had the cracks always been there, waiting for the right moment to break wide open? Nestled in the rolling hills of Greenwood County stood the modest town of Maplewood. It was a place where picket fences lined the streets and neighbors exchanged friendly smiles during evening strolls. Church steeples dotted the horizon, revealing a community steeped in religious tradition. Chief among these congregations was the Maplewood Evangelical Church, housed in a stately brick building on the edge of town. For nearly 3 decades, its spiritual leader, Pastor William Bill Anderson, had been a central figure. He was known for his kindness, his impassioned sermons, and the sense of unity he fostered among the faithful. Bill Anderson had served as the head pastor since he was in his late 20s. He arrived in Maplewood fresh out of seminary, newly married to his sweetheart, Caroline. Together, they cultivated a reputation for devotion, warmth, and unwavering moral principles. Church membership soared under Bill's leadership. His Sunday messages brimmed with hope and empathy. The congregation saw him as a beacon of stability in uncertain times, offering counsel for everything from marital strife to financial woes. Caroline, ever at Bill's side, led Bible study groups and community outreach initiatives, endearing herself to the town just as much as her husband. From humble beginnings, Bill and Caroline built what appeared to be a rock-solid partnership. They celebrated their anniversaries with quiet dinners at the local steakhouse, always returning home to a tidy white house near the center of Maplewood. There were no children in their marriage, a point of sadness for some of the more traditional-minded churchgoers. But Bill and Caroline dismissed such scrutiny with gentle smiles. They believed God had a different plan for them, possibly a destiny to serve their congregation as a family. Each year that passed seemed only to deepen their bond, or so everyone assumed. Within the church, Bill's charismatic style and Caroline's attentiveness to detail made Maplewood Evangelical a hallmark of community engagement. They organized charity bake sales, youth basketball tournaments, food drives during the holidays, anything that would get the townspeople involved in good works. Bill's sermons were often broadcast on local radio. Those who heard him for the first time attested that his words carried a uniquely empathic quality, as though he understood the core wounds of the human heart. Maplewood was proud of its dynamic pastor and his wife, painting them as an ideal couple, devout, caring, and happily committed to one another. Beneath the polished surface of Maplewood's beloved pastor, however, seeds of turmoil were quietly taking root. In what would eventually become the biggest scandal in the town's history, Bill's secrets were as surprising as they were disturbing. Whispers of late-night phone calls, unaccounted for absences, and a shifting atmosphere around the church and parsonage began to spread among those most observant. An inexplicable tension developed in Bill's eyes, a certain strain that was never there before. Soon enough, the carefully crafted facade of the Anderson household would be shattered, and Maplewood would come to realize how little they truly knew about their pastor. 28 years of marriage is a long time under any circumstances, but for Bill and Caroline Anderson, it felt like an eternity lived under constant community scrutiny. Early in their union, the couple had to adapt to the persistent gaze of church members who considered them paragons of virtue. Any small disagreement or personal failing became fodder for gossip. So, from day one, Bill and Caroline learned to guard their true emotions behind closed doors. Their public displays of affection were stately and reserved. When asked if they ever argued, Bill would laugh politely, deflecting the question with a pastor's trademark diplomacy. Yet, behind the scenes, Caroline sensed her husband's restlessness, a subtle change in his manner, especially when he looked at other people, both men and women, hinted at unspoken desires. She chalked it up to the stresses of ministry. Bill was always weighed down by other people's problems, prayers for healing, financial miracles, broken marriages. She assumed the little cracks in his demeanor, his disappearing acts under the guise of solitary prayer, his occasional late-night drives, were merely his way of coping with spiritual exhaustion. Caroline's own faith taught her not to pry, to trust, and to believe that a pastor might need space to commune with God. Nevertheless, the couple's marital bedroom life had been a quiet subject of sadness for Caroline for many years. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means everything to us, and we're truly grateful to have you here. Thank you. Bill's once passionate embraces had diminished to perfunctory gestures. If he offered an apology, it was muttered under his breath. If he showed affection, it always seemed time for the moments just before Sunday service, never spontaneous or romantic. Caroline found herself praying more fervently for the return of the man she'd married. She sought counsel from older women in the congregation, but they offered only generalities, avoiding any real confrontation with the possibility that Bill Anderson, their revered pastor, might have serious marital issues. The tension at home magnified when Bill started spending extra hours in his church office. He told Caroline he was preparing for revival services, an intense season of daily gatherings that demanded meticulous planning. But one question lingered: why was he so reluctant to have her help, especially since she'd assisted in so many revival services before? His eyes darted when he spoke, as though he feared her seeing something in his expression. Caroline felt she was losing her husband to a realm of secrecy, yet her religious devotion told her to remain supportive and patient. She could only guess how her unwavering belief in him might one day be tested. Caroline's frustration grew with each unanswered question, each abrupt change in Bill's routine. Yet the thought of confronting him directly felt daunting. She feared uncovering an ugly truth that might shatter her faith, her marriage, and her status as the pastor's wife. So she stayed silent, even as a voice in her mind whispered that something about Bill's life had spun horribly off course. Only much later would she learn the nature of his dark secrets, ones that lurked far beyond the typical stereotypes of pastoral misconduct. When the truth emerged, it would threaten not just their marriage, but the very foundation of Maplewood Evangelical. It was during a chilly autumn week 5 years earlier that Bill Anderson first encountered Alexis Gray. She had recently moved to Maplewood from a larger city, hoping to escape the harsh judgments and ignorance she'd faced most of her life. Tall, with an air of quiet dignity, Alexis had begun her transition years prior but still endured discrimination in her hometown. Rumors swirled that she had been fired from 2 jobs simply for being transgender. Determined to rebuild her life, she chose Maplewood, a seemingly calm, traditional spot, to find peace. Little did she know she was stepping into a landmine of secrets. Alexis first attended the Maplewood Evangelical Church out of curiosity and perhaps a lingering, if cautious, yearning for spiritual community. Bill noticed her sitting in the back pew, a solitary figure. The hush that fell over the congregation was palpable, as many recognized Alexis from local gossip. Bill made a point of greeting her after the service, shaking her hand firmly, meeting her gaze with compassion instead of judgment. That moment of simple kindness carried a weight that neither fully understood yet. Alexis felt relief to be treated with dignity. Bill felt an unsteady warmth that lingered in his mind. Over the following months, Alexis attended services sporadically, slipping in and out like a quiet ghost. She lived in a tiny studio apartment, worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, and kept mostly to herself. However, Bill found himself looking for her in the pews. Whenever she attended, he would adapt his sermon to speak of acceptance and love, words he hoped might soothe any fear in Alexis's heart. Outside the church, he made sure to offer a friendly wave if he spotted her on the street. In the name of pastoral care, Bill invited her to discuss life and faith over coffee. At first, The meetings were wholesome enough. Discussions about scripture, the nature of compassion, and Alexis's struggles with identity. But an undercurrent hummed between them. Bill couldn't ignore how his stomach fluttered when Alexis spoke. She possessed a serenity and intellect that enthralled him, and that contact with something outside his tightly structured life was like tasting forbidden fruit. Alexis, meanwhile, wrestled with conflicting emotions. Gratitude for Bill's acceptance, guilt for feeling drawn to a married pastor, and fear of condemnation if the relationship crossed moral boundaries. Their every conversation teetered on the edge, dangerously intimate even while clothed in pious words. As trust blossomed, Bill opened up about his frustrations and sense of longing, describing them in abstract terms, never directly admitting his deeper attractions. Alexis, however, was perceptive. She recognized the shift in Bill's demeanor whenever their eyes locked. Though she feared heartbreak and scandal, she also felt a powerful connection that transcended words. What started as pastoral support evolved into a tentative friendship, and then into a whispered dance of attraction. A single moment of vulnerability, a tearful hug after a particularly emotional conversation, would become the tipping point, igniting a clandestine affair that none of Maplewood's devout residents would ever imagine. The first kiss was stolen in the cramped confines of Bill's office, the faint glow of the table lamp illuminating tear-stained faces. Bill had offered a prayer for Alexis, who was grappling with loneliness and fear of rejection. In the midst of that prayer, their hands found each other, and the intensity between them boiled over into a moment neither could take back. They pulled apart instantly, shock and guilt surfacing in equal measure. But the damage was done. A line had been crossed. Every sermon Bill delivered from that day forward felt haunted by the knowledge of his own failing. Still, the pull was undeniable. Flimsy resolutions to end the fledgling affair collapsed under the weight of their mutual longing. Their meetings grew more frequent and intimate, hidden behind the respectable veneer of pastoral counseling. Bill secretly rented a small cabin on the outskirts of Maplewood, ostensibly for prayer retreats. In truth, it was their rendezvous spot, a secluded place to explore their bond without the judgmental eyes of the town. Over time, Bill found himself lying to Caroline about late-night phone calls, meetings with church elders, or emergency hospital visits. As the web of deception expanded, so did the intensity of his guilt. Alexis, for her part, struggled with overwhelming confusion. She was falling in love with a married man of the cloth, someone revered by an entire community that, by and large, would not accept her. Each time Bill slipped out of his house under the cover of darkness, she questioned whether this love could ever be worth the anguish it would cause if discovered. Yet, Bill's gentle reassurances and emotional vulnerability lit a spark in her that she had never felt before. Their stolen hours together became an addictive refuge from a reality that neither was ready to face but both knew could not last forever. Months turned into years. Their affair was carefully orchestrated through coded text messages and hush-hush phone calls. Bill juggled church responsibilities, Caroline's growing suspicions, and his moral compass, which swung wildly between righteousness and self-indulgence. The secrecy itself seemed to fuel the relationship. Each sermon on sin or temptation became a private dialogue with his own conscience. He would speak of forgiveness and redemption, his voice trembling slightly, knowing he was preaching as much to himself as he was to the congregation. Meanwhile, Alexis dreaded every Sunday, fearful that Bill might denounce her and their relationship to save his own reputation. Outside of the cabin's walls, Bill's public image soared. The church thrived under his leadership, and donations poured in. He even started a new community center project, championing inclusivity, though few knew the personal significance behind that stance. Yet cracks were starting to show. Certain elders noticed Bill's unusual exhaustion and sporadic bouts of distraction. Caroline's patience wore thin with every alibi that rang hollow. Hushed rumors cropped up. Some suspected an affair, though they never guessed with whom. The stage was set for a dramatic collision of worlds, and when it happened, the reverberations would tear at the heart of Maplewood itself. Some say the first real spark of suspicion came from George Halverson, the church treasurer. George had been part of Maplewood Evangelical for decades, and he was known for his meticulous records. He began noticing irregularities in certain budget line items. It seemed that some church funds were being funneled towards expenses that Bill labeled outreach projects. But George couldn't find evidence of those projects in any of the official ministry outlines. When George approached Bill politely about clarifying the expenses, Bill grew uncharacteristically flustered and defensive, brushing George off with a quick mention of confidential pastoral work. Caroline's suspicions, meanwhile, reached a tipping point on a windy October night. Bill came home far later than usual, carrying the faint scent of perfume that was decidedly not hers. His explanations were hurried, claiming he'd been visiting a congregant in crisis. Caroline was no stranger to Bill's pastoral duties, but something about his demeanor, furtive glances at his phone, the slight tremble in his voice, made her stomach twist. That night, as Bill dozed off, Caroline scrolled through his phone in a moment of desperation. She discovered vague text messages with an unlisted number. Nothing overt, but enough to confirm a hidden narrative. The next morning, Caroline visited her friend and fellow church member, Linda Palmer. Over a pot of tea, Caroline revealed her growing disquiet. Linda listened intently, offering reassurance but also stoking Caroline's fears. Linda had noticed changes in Bill too. His sermons had grown more impassioned but also more personal, as though he was grappling with something intense. They swapped stories. Linda had seen Bill's car parked by the outskirts of town at odd hours, with the lights off. Caroline had heard Bill whispering on the phone at night. What they didn't realize was that the woman at the other end was Alexis Gray. While the rumor mill churned, Alexis tried to distance herself from Bill. She sensed the net of suspicion tightening around them both. Late-night phone calls turned into sporadic texts, short, coded messages that only they understood. Bill, frantic at the thought of losing her, escalated his pleas to continue their secret relationship. Alexis vacillated between guilt and yearning. She worried about her own safety, knowing how small-town prejudices could flare if their affair came to light. Still, love, if that was indeed what it was, kept pulling her back. She convinced herself that Bill would eventually handle the fallout and find a way to be together openly. As the days turned colder, church congregants noticed Caroline's red-rimmed eyes, Bill's stammering when asked direct questions about his schedule, and the missing funds that George Halverson silently flagged as questionable. A storm was brewing, and the tension crackled in the air. The first official confrontation came during a deacon's meeting when George insisted on reviewing every penny spent. Bill's shoulders tightened, but he managed to deflect most inquiries with vague talk of spiritual emergencies and unspoken outreach. Even so, a sense of impending revelation was palpable. The fragile walls of secrecy were about to be tested from every side. The unraveling began with a single photograph. Tom Penfield, a curious local journalist for the Maplewood Daily Gazette, had been following up on rumors of financial irregularities at the church. In the course of his investigation, he staked out the small cabin Bill used as a prayer retreat. On a chilly evening, Tom captured a grainy image of the pastor stepping out of the cabin with Alexis Gray, their faces close, their expressions unmistakably tender. Tom didn't recognize Alexis at first, but soon discovered that she was a transgender woman new to town. Sensing a sensational story, he began piecing the puzzle together. Tom's editor, eager for a headline, pushed him to confirm the affair before running anything. Over the course of several weeks, Tom collected more evidence, phone records from an anonymous source, sightings from neighbors near the cabin, and even receipts that traced back to the church's outreach fund. Then came the bombshell confrontation. Armed with his findings, Tom knocked on Bill's office door at the church. Bill tried to appear composed, but his sweaty palms and darting eyes betrayed him. As Tom laid out the damning evidence, Bill begged for discretion, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Tom listened in stony silence. When the story broke in the Maplewood Daily Gazette, it was as though a grenade had been tossed into the heart of the community. The headline read, "Pastor's Secret Affair Exposed, Embezzlement Alleged." Beneath it, a blurred photo of Bill and Alexis leaving the cabin sent shockwaves through the conservative town. Many refused to believe it at first. Others lashed out, condemning both Bill and Alexis for their supposed moral failings. Caroline read the article through tears, her heart pounding as she realized the depth of Bill's betrayal. She had feared an affair, but never imagined it would involve someone so unexpected, or that church funds were entangled. Social media ignited. Church members traded accusatory messages, some calling for Bill's immediate resignation, others defending him as a victim of malicious rumors. Anonymous trolls targeted Alexis online, spewing hateful rhetoric about her gender identity and character. A few threatened violence. Maplewood's sense of neighborly decorum dissolved overnight, replaced by a carnival of outrage and disbelief. From behind the closed doors of their home, Caroline wrestled with the ultimate betrayal. She vacillated between heartbreak, fury, and a lingering sense of duty to stand by her husband, despite everything. It was the darkest hour she had ever known, and she was far from alone in her anguish. In a hastily arranged church meeting, Bill faced a crowd of stunned parishioners. His normally confident voice trembled. He denied embezzlement but admitted to moral failings. He offered a vague apology, never directly addressing the nature of his relationship with Alexis. Some in the congregation gasped, while others wept openly. A vote was taken to suspend Bill from his pastoral duties pending a full investigation. Caroline, sitting in the front pew, looked hollow, as though her soul had been torn from her body. Across town, Alexis watched the live stream of the meeting, tears streaking her face as hateful comments scrolled below the video window. In the weeks that followed, an official inquiry into the church's finances commenced. The deacons discovered that approximately $50,000 in church funds had been diverted to a discretionary outreach account, money that Bill had sole authority to spend. Tracing the paper trail led to suspicious cabin rental payments, frequent dinners, and even small luxury gifts. Bill insisted these expenses were part of an off-the-record initiative to help marginalized individuals, including Alexis. While that explanation held a kernel of truth, Bill had indeed given some funds to Alexis for her medical and living expenses. It also masked the deeper reality that a significant portion was used to facilitate their affair. As the church's lawyers ramped up their investigation, local law enforcement became involved due to the embezzlement allegations. Detective Maria Sanchez, known for her thorough approach, took the lead. She interviewed church members, rifled through financial statements, and eventually summoned Bill and Alexis to the police station for questioning. Alexis arrived nervously, her face pale, fear evident in her eyes. Bill showed up in his rumpled suit, looking far from the self-assured pastor Maplewood had once revered. Detective Sanchez noted the tension between them, the sadness in Alexis's voice, and Bill's protective posture whenever Alexis seemed overwhelmed. Halfway through the interrogation, an unexpected twist emerged. Detective Sanchez uncovered multiple bank transactions from an account under Alexis's name, funds that, on the surface, appeared to be hush money Bill had wired to her. Rumors flared that Alexis had been blackmailing Bill, threatening to expose their affair if he didn't pay up. Alexis vehemently denied this. She claimed the money was given voluntarily, a gesture from Bill to help her secure a safer living situation. Bill, for his part, confirmed that Alexis had never extorted him, but by then the gossip was unstoppable. The narrative took on a life of its own, painting Alexis as a cunning manipulator. Amid the swirling accusations, Caroline broke her silence. In a tearful statement to the Maplewood Daily Gazette, she revealed her heartbreak and frustration, expressing that she had no knowledge of the diverted church funds and had never suspected Bill's involvement with Alexis until just weeks prior. Her confession seemed to galvanize a wave of sympathy. Congregants who once idolized Bill turned their compassion towards Caroline, viewing her as the betrayed wife left in the rubble of her husband's moral failings. The entire town, once unified under Bill's leadership, now found itself dividing into factions, those who saw Bill as irredeemable and those who believed in repentance and second chances. Just when the community thought the scandal had reached its peak, a new revelation rocked Maplewood. A private investigator hired by the church uncovered evidence that Bill had been siphoning more than just money. He had also been manipulating official church membership documents to inflate numbers, thereby securing larger donations from certain benefactors who funded the church on a per-member basis. The duplicity ran deeper than anyone had imagined, and it was no longer just about an affair. It was about systemic fraud. Maplewood's once admired pastor now stood at the center of a wide-ranging criminal investigation, with Alexis and Caroline caught in the crossfire. As the legal proceedings ramped up, Bill faced multiple charges, including fraud and potential embezzlement. The church relieved him of his duties permanently, replacing his pulpit presence with an interim pastor who struggled to unify the battered congregation. In a desperate attempt to mitigate his sentence, Bill's lawyer crafted a plea deal, arguing that Bill had acted under emotional distress and personal turmoil, never intending to harm the church. Caroline filed for separation, not ready to commit to a divorce but unable to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the destructive stranger revealed by the scandal. In court, Alexis testified reluctantly, clarifying that she had never coerced Bill into anything. She described how she came to Maplewood seeking peace and found only heartbreak. Her testimony provided crucial context. Bill had used church funds as a misguided expression of care, hoping to support her through transition-related expenses, rent, and other needs. But the line between charitable acts and personal indulgence blurred as the affair progressed. Still, the public perception was merciless. Even after the trial ended, Alexis received hateful messages daily. Gossip and half-truths branded her a gold digger and a homewrecker, when her only sin was falling for a married man. The trial culminated in a tense sentencing hearing. Bill, wearing a dark suit that hung loosely on his now thin frame, stood before the judge. Tearfully, he recounted how his spiritual calling turned into a prison of expectations, how the love and acceptance he preached never quite took root in his own heart. The judge, acknowledging Bill's remorse but also the grave nature of his crimes, handed down a 2-year prison sentence plus restitution for the misappropriated funds. Gasps rippled through the small courtroom, but many agreed that justice had to be served. Bill was led away in handcuffs, the final blow to his pastoral legacy. In the weeks following the verdict, Maplewood tried to pick up the pieces. The church membership dwindled, and its reputation lay in tatters. Some found new places of worship, others abandoned organized religion entirely, disillusioned by the hypocrisy they'd witnessed. Caroline, shell-shocked but resolute, moved to a neighboring county, staying with relatives who offered her a quiet place to heal. She wrestled with her faith, torn between anger at Bill's betrayal and the teachings about forgiveness she'd upheld for so long. In rare moments, she found herself praying for both Bill and Alexis, uncertain of what her heart truly wanted. One final twist emerged months later, when Alexis, determined to reclaim her life, penned a memoir about her experiences. Titled Beyond the Pulpit, it chronicled her journey of transition, her hopes for acceptance, and the tragic love affair that upended a town. Though some labeled it exploitative, the book also sparked conversations about empathy, identity, and the intricacies of human imperfection. To the shock of many, Caroline wrote an anonymous letter of support to the publisher, praising Alexis's courage. "We both lost something dear," she wrote. "I pray we can both find peace." In that moment, Maplewood's greatest scandal became a testament to the fragility and resilience of the human heart. Though Bill served his sentence and eventually emerged from prison a changed man, his future remained uncertain. Caroline continued her life without him, finding solace in a smaller, more progressive church that embraced her pain and offered genuine healing. Alexis used the proceeds from her memoir to move to a new city, away from the shadows of Maplewood, and became an advocate for transgender rights. In time, the scars left by the affair dulled, if never fully healed. Some of Maplewood's residents chose bitterness, while others found lessons in compassion and understanding. Yet, the memory of the handsome pastor who preached so fervently, and the scandal that shook an entire town, would never truly fade. Even in its darkest chapters, the story underscored a sobering truth. Behind the most pious of facades can lie secrets that defy imagination. And sometimes, it is in the shattering of those facades that grace, in its most unexpected form, can finally emerge.